On the 15th of January 2016, Islamist militants launched a pre-dawn attack on an African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, forward operating base garrisoned by Kenya Defence Forces, KDF troops at Al-Ade, Gedo region, Somalia. Harakat Al-Shabaab al-Mujahideen, commonly known as Al-Shabaab, claimed that, as it says here, Mujahideen fighters from the Commander Saleh and Nabani battalion stormed the Kenyan base in Al-Ade, killing more than 100 Kenyan invaders, seizing their weapons and military vehicles, and even capturing Kenyan soldiers alive. The government of Kenya has not given a precise death toll. The UN monitoring group on Somalia believes that some 150 KDF personnel were killed during the attack, making it the largest military defeat in Kenyan history. As the story broke, concern on Twitter was initially about the main details of the attack, especially the number of casualties. KDF went silent, sparking a more far-reaching debate, much of it on social media, about the public's access to information during wartime. Almost exactly a year after Al-Ade, Al-Shabaab launched a very similar attack on KDF troops based in Kolbio, Lower Juba region. In stark contrast to their communications response to Al-Ade, this time the KDF acted quickly on social media with operational updates, offering their version of events and some information on casualties. So this is the Greater Horn of Africa here, Somalia in the top right, Kenya down here. Sector 2 is AMISOM KDF sector. Al-Ade is actually in the Ethiopia sector. There were KDF troops there when Al-Ade attack occurred. Kolbio is close to the Kenya-Somalia border. The contrast in the communications response raises questions that drive this paper. Why did the KDF not provide real-time updates about the Al-Ade attack, but did provide information about the Kolbio attack 1 year later? The findings of a series of focus groups and interviews and observation of social media use offers data on the public mood at the time. This, along with an official account of Kenya's military activities in Somalia, helps provide 3 plausible explanations for the KDF's differing response, and I'll address those today. Here's an outline. Talk a little about how this paper is situated within the literature, a little bit about the methodological framework as well, then why the KDF is in Somalia, the right to know in the context of social media warfare, then a quick discussion about Al-Ade, which I see as something of a communication vacuum, and then Kolbio a year later, where there were more regular operational updates. I reflect on why that might be the case, and question whether there's an increased openness in KDF's use of social media and what they talk about, and then I suggest some brief conclusions towards the end. This paper serves to answer the call for country-specific cases to understand ways in which social media, traditional media, and political culture interact. Many of the studies and commentaries that address this topic tend to consider the influence of social media and traditional media on elections, especially in the US and other wealthy Western nations. This paper engages more closely with an emerging literature trying to comprehend the dynamics of what Thomas Nissen calls social media warfare, a war over information online that's drawing in citizen states and their militaries in equal measure. It also contributes to literature covering aspects or covering responses to Kenya's operations in Somalia, Kenyan security forces' use of social media in their ongoing conflict with Al-Shabaab, and the resilience of the East African terrorist group, especially through its use of social media. In doing so, the paper offers a glimpse into the domestic political elements of a foreign war played out on Twitter and other internet-based platforms, a location that George Ogola and Michael Waugh call Kenya's third space, a site of information sharing neither owned by the state nor mainstream media, but potentially powerful enough to be contested. Taking inspiration from the quietness of the technopolitics that Eugenio Gaglione describes in his study of ICT in Ethiopia, This paper regards social media platforms such as Twitter as rowdy sites of contestation where discussions of security-related matters affecting Kenyans are played out in the open, often with strong political undercurrent, by ordinary citizens and powerful key influencers who are both seen and unseen. While it would be overstating the case to see these dialogues as staged events, as Nicole Stremlau argues of Somali radio call-in programs, where citizens discuss accountability and democratic participation, the Twitter battles can be understood, much like the call-in shows, as being shaped by power, political interests, and economic agendas. While much of the research has been undertaken on the role of social media during the Arab Spring in North Africa and in the responding to Ebola in West Africa, there have been very few studies in the use of social media during times of insecurity or uncertainty in East Africa. Two recent contributions are David Mayer's analysis of Al-Shabaab's tweets during the Westgate assault of 2013 in Nairobi, and research conducted by Thomas Simon and his team on tweets sent by individuals and emergency responders in the aftermath of the attack on Kenyan soil. This is the first study of social media concerning Kenyan security personnel on foreign soil, where engagement with the public was guided by strict communications protocols. This study also differs from those of the domestic Kenyan setting in that its data is not tied to online social media content. Conversations trending on Twitter and Facebook identified Al-Shabaab's attack on El Ade as a topic of interest to Kenyans on social media at the time. The online demand for further information and subsequent silence from official sources make understanding the KDF's lack of communication a topic of interest in itself. When neither the KDF nor the National Counter-Terrorism Centre, NCTC, responded to invitations to discuss their social media strategy, the research focus for this paper remained on offline methods of data collection, which shifted to understanding the audience's appetite for information about El Ade. If after the attack social media users did not feel they had a right to know details, then the KDF was perhaps justified in not providing any. The Kenya-based research sought to understand the various nuances in calls for details about the attack, with an interest in comparing the heated clamour online with how the conversation flowed among co-presence users of social media. As discussed later, it often resulted in contrasting opinions among the focus groups, with one side venturing reasons why the KDF should not provide what some deemed to be sensitive information, and the other side demanding citizens' right to know details about the attack. In all cases, it led to further speculation over the KDF's reasons for its silence. The first phase of fieldwork for this study took place in Kenya during February and March 2016, a little more than a month after the El Ade attack. 11 focus group discussions in total, comprising 71 informants. It was 30 male, 30 female, 41 male, conducted in Nairobi and Mombasa, where social media use is most concentrated. Research assistants helped with recruiting participants who took part in discussions based on their best fit into one of the following categories. They're university students, non-university youth, non-university adults, and professionals, professional occupations. And all in these groups describe themselves as users to varying degree or frequency of social media, especially Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp. In excess of 40 relevant interviews took place in Kenya at different points in 2016-17 with bloggers, individuals working in journalism, social and or political research in the security sector. Interviews conducted in English, focus groups in English, Swahili, or a mixture of both languages. Okay, a bit of background. Has anyone not heard of Al-Shabaab? Okay, right. Westgate, which I mentioned earlier. Do you remember the Westgate attack? Yeah. Anyone heard of the El Ade attack I've been speaking about? Anyone? Okay, so fewer people. And Kolbio? Anyone has heard of El Ade attack? No. Okay. Kolbio? No. But you had heard of Westgate. All right. Yeah. Okay. That figures. So Al-Shabaab was designated a foreign terrorist organisation by the US government in 2008 and by the UK in 2010. For more than a decade, Al-Shabaab has undertaken a violent insurgency in southern and central Somalia in an attempt to oust UN-backed Somali federal government, or SFG, and AMISOM peacekeepers mandated to provide security and reduce the threat posed by the organisation. AMISOM self-identifies as a peace support mission, although it holds more of the attributes of a counterinsurgency operation than a peacekeeping or peace enforcement operation mission. Al-Shabaab leaders aim to prevent AMISOM and the SFG from stabilising the country, thus enabling its insurgents to one day claim territorial control of Somalia. In October 2011, the Republic of Kenya invoked UN Charter Article 51, legalising use of force against a member of the UN. 2 days later, and for motivations that have been disputed, KDF troops crossed the border with Somalia under Operation Linda Inchi, Operation Protect the Nation, a combined air and ground offensive against Al-Shabaab. The KDF joined AMISOM in February 2012, principally to gain international legitimacy by being part of a multinational force and to ease the government of Kenya's financial burden. And KDF operations in Somalia are still ongoing. In planning for Operation Linda Nchi, the KDF was well aware of the need to manage its image in the eyes of the Kenyan taxpayer. And I quote from this book, Operation Linda Nchi: public perception on military undertakings is critical and must be sought and maintained throughout the duration of the operation, reads the official account here, adding that the KDF realised that people had the right to know and that journalists had the right to tell. The need for openness in the flow of information from the military to the public was also pressed by General Julius Waweru Karangi, then Chief of Defence Forces, in his assertion that Kenyans had the right to audit and interrogate the KDF's engagement. In essence, the KDF position, as expressed in its own account of the operation, is that the support of Kenyan taxpayers is essential to the military success, and so the public has a right to know details about their activities. The counter to this view, and for operational reasons one that militaries have traditionally preferred, is that information should only be disseminated on a need-to-know basis. Has anyone heard of that term, need to know? Right to know? Okay. So need to know, that's to say information about military activities is sensitive and access to it should be limited to those with a business need, as the UK government's definition of it. This was formerly the position of the KDF, which admits that its military operations have been cloaked with a ubiquitous blanket of state security and never subject to scrutiny. And herein lies the inherent contradiction of the use of social media in the military setting. An army is understood as a closed and secretive organisation that communicates in a formal manner. Social media tends to encourage more open, informal and emotional communication. Spurred on by Al-Shabaab's use of information communication technology to connect with the public, Kenyan security agencies quickly realised that in the need-to-know versus right-to-know debate, social media is a game changer. This is an anonymous Kenyan security force saying this here, source saying that here. The increasingly important role of social media warfare is acknowledged in the official account of Kenya's military experience in Somalia, which was marked by an aggressive social media campaign by KDF and Al-Shabaab to the general population. At the onset of the operation, so continues the official account, KDF recognised that social media had the ability to communicate with large audiences. And the sheer size of the Kenyan audience that both KDF and Al-Shabaab seek to influence cannot be overemphasised. Social media use among adult internet users or reported smartphone users in Kenya is 82%, well above China at 62%, 63 there, India 62, UK at 66, and the US at 71, and Africa only below Nigeria to 85%. One popular arena is Facebook, which as of September 2017 has just over 7 million monthly users in Kenya. WhatsApp, which allows for communication at the person-to-person level or in groups of individual users, is estimated to have 12 million users in Kenya. For airing grievances in the public arena, however, Twitter is currently the platform of choice for many Kenyans and is said to operate as the country's virtual town square in Kenya's third space that is social media. Kenya comes third in a ranking of sub-Saharan African countries where citizens tweeted most in 2016. That was the year of the Al-Adi attack, with 76 million geolocated tweets. According to Nendo, a digital research company, in 2016, there were 2.2 million monthly active Kenyans on Twitter, close to half of whom use Twitter daily. While the KDF's Twitter account dates from late 2012, Al-Shabaab have disseminated their message using video websites and online discussion forums for closer to a decade. The organisation's multiple Twitter accounts were operational in 2009, but particularly active in late 2011 when their media operatives engaged in public sparring on social media with Major Emmanuel Chirchir, then the official spokesman for the KDF, incidentally whose brother was killed in Al-Adi. The KDF Twitter account was long regarded as a trusted source on security issues relating to Somalia, and Major Chirchir was hugely popular amongst journalists and the public for updates on Operation Vindichi. The Kenyan military's public affairs campaign was further enhanced when select journalists were embedded on operations in Somalia. A quote from a journalist: "Journalists embedded with the KDF were not stopped or restricted from using social media. It was all systems go," describes one reporter who accompanied troops in the Kenya-Somalia borderland. The effect of the information flow on social media, defence correspondent notes, is that journalists' reports helped their audience to identify with the troops deployed against Al-Shabaab in Somalia and sowed a sense of patriotism among the Kenyan public. It was quite difficult looking for images of actually most of these if you put in a Google search, a Google image search, that aren't fairly horrific, particularly of the Al-Shabaab attacks. And that's largely because Al-Shabaab have widely used social media to show some of their abhorrent acts, and there's some really gruesome material up there. I'm not showing any gruesome stuff here, and this is the best I could do with the two attacks in Somalia without getting too graphic. Awareness of the KDF's conflict in Somalia shot up in September 2013 when Al-Shabaab made international headlines with its assault on Nairobi's Westgate shopping mall. The world watched on as 67 civilians were killed in a 4-day-long assault. The attackers used social media during the assault led to them being dubbed Twitter terrorists, and helped ensure that Al-Shabaab became infamous for more than just the brutality of its actions on the ground. Not only was Westgate the first time that a terrorist group used Twitter to claim responsibility for an attack, but it also cemented for Al-Shabaab the dubious reputation of having carried out the earliest incidents of real-time direct-to-target audience propaganda, live tweeting by a terrorist organisation during an ongoing operation. Analysis of social media used by state actors during the assault on Westgate identifies a lack of coordination over when, how and what could be made public, and also reveals that security breaches within emergency organisations led to the relay of sensitive information on Twitter. Any discussion of social media during and after the Westgate, Al-Adi and Kolbio attacks should not conceal significant differences in the context of the incidents and the official responses. While for many Kenyan civilians the war on Al-Shabaab falls under the umbrella of security, irrespective of whether the location is home or abroad, the Al-Adi and Kolbio attacks that this paper focuses on are distinct from Westgate in that neither was a terrorist attack in the usual sense, but was combat during war. Both the Al-Adi and Kolbio attacks targeted a military installation within the KDF's Somalia theatre of operations. The response to the Somalia-based attacks were therefore entirely a military affair, differentiating them from the Westgate debacle, which involved a host of responders and military security actors, domestic security actors. In contrast to Westgate, the KDF or the Ministry of Defence, MODs, Kenyan MODs, official comments on social media or any other channels, therefore guided by different bureaucratic, legislative and institutional protocols that apply to their mission in Somalia. As is now discussed, despite the similar nature of Al-Shabaab's attacks on Al-Ade and Kulbio, the KDF's social media response to the two incidents was markedly different. For all the KDF's proclamation about the Kenyan public's right to know about its activities, the official message on social media was light on details during and after the El-Ade attack. This follows the position of those who argue that any loss of control over how one's image is perceived is deemed to be a significant threat to security. However, as a brief summary of communication on social media at the time of the attack shows, too little official information can also generate controversy. One of the first to report the attack was the @ModernCore, or now @PatrickSafari_R Twitter account run by a guy called, anyone heard of Patrick Safari? I don't expect you to have done, no. A prison officer at the time, and prior to going by his personal name, Mr. Safari ran an anonymous Twitter and Facebook accounts that shared information and what appeared to be classified leaks from various police, prison, military and state arms. And @ModernCore was frequently the first to break many stories because of that, because of the sources he was getting. And it says here, I don't think you can read that there. Breaking: Al-Shabaab militants attacked KDF base in El-Ade, Somalia early morning. Fatalities reported. So far no word from Kenya government. AMISOM confirmed the incident, as did the MOD, Kenyan MOD, with the following release. Today, 15th of January 2016 at 4 a.m, Al-Shabaab militia attacked the Somali National Army camp, which is in close proximity to KDF camp El-Ade. SNA camp was overrun. KDF troops under AMISOM counter-attacked in support of the SNA. Fighting still ongoing by the time of this relief, and a number of casualties on both sides is unknown. KDF will provide more information on the incident once it becomes available. This confirmation from the MOD came not from an official military social media account, but in the form of a hard copy press release. It was left to others to take a photograph of the release and to share it online. Meanwhile, in the absence of any alternative official online counter-narrative from the MOD or government, the militants were able to drive the narrative. Not what you want. There were those on social media who were aware of the possibility of propaganda from the militants and were leery of repeating the information coming out of from Al-Shabaab out of Somalia at the time. In response to the multi-agency NCTC attempted to present a case for why Al-Shabaab's reports should be snubbed. And it says here, "We urge all Kenyans and people of goodwill to stand with AMISOM Somalia and KDF by refusing to be conduits for terrorist propaganda." The hashtag I stand with KDF began to trend in solidarity with Kenya's army, but little more official detail was provided by the KDF. Tweeting under the @CTNSIS, which is Counterterrorism and National Security Intelligence Services acronym, Strategic Intelligence Services SIS, a Tel Aviv-based security information organization, quickly offered insight into how communications might be used to influence the narrative. The objective of raising figures is to counter possibility of high losses on their side. It's psychological information warfare. SIS also offered news of the KDF's retaliatory action. "Accept no mercy in El-Ade, Somalia. We will give glory, valor and victory to our motherland. KDF soldiers vow." Spelt in the American sense, incidentally, rather than the Kenyan/British sense. Some Kenyans used social media to express their suspicion that such news of retaliation was merely pro-government propaganda, and suggested that the official updates were not as comprehensive as they wanted them to be. With no further information from official sources and nothing on KDF casualties, Martha Karua, a high-profile politician with over 700,000 followers on Twitter, later pointed to the dilemma of security-related news in the public domain and said, "Citizens need information and have a right to know." In urging the Kenyan security forces to provide some facts on the attack, Karua acknowledged the enemy's ability to influence the narrative. Releasing information will insulate citizens from propaganda. The assessment that releasing the casualty information would have been damaging to the KDF's reputation and therefore of propaganda value to the enemy likely helps account for the refusal to offer any official comment. It's an indicator of Kenyan officials' understanding of security information on social media as a data or commodity that's to be guarded. It's also contrary to the official line taking during Operation Lindanchi that the KDF had to go out of its way to avail information to the public, operational security considerations notwithstanding. Instead, through its reticence during and in the immediate aftermath of the deadly attack, the KDF was making clear its position on the flow of information concerning this particular threat to national security. The need to know was paramount. The lives lost were acknowledged later through articles in the media covering the arrival of fallen being greeted in Nairobi with military honours, and in posts that promised reprisals, but the requests for details on casualties were never satisfied. The right to know, so often a demand of Kenyans on Twitter, was sidelined, and any information that was to be released to civilians was strongly regulated. These stills are from Al-Kataib, which is the propaganda arm of Al-Shabaab. And it has some very slick, well-edited, well-produced, if highly gruesome and abhorrent content. But they are quite a well-oiled machine. These come out later. We're seeing at the moment, as of yesterday, publicly released footage from ISIS. In part, Al-Shabaab is ISIS affiliated, but ISIS videos from Niger of American forces who were ambushed and killed a few months ago. On the 27th of January 2017, Al-Shabaab conducted another attack on an Amisom base garrison by KDF troops, this time at Kolbeo, Lower Juba, Somalia. The assault closely resembled that on El Ade almost exactly a year before, with the initial launch of a suicide vehicle-borne improvised explosive device at the camp gates that allowed fighters to attack en masse. The difference this time was an apparent sea change in KDF's attitude towards informing the public. In stark contrast to their communications response to Al-Ade, for Kolbeo, the KDF supplied their Twitter followers with a series of briefs tagged as Ops Update. With frequent use of Our Brave and Soldiers, KDF's content was as much aimed at uniting the audience around Kenyan troops as it was on an actual update on the KDF response to the attack. Crucially, this time, a reminder was quickly made about the dangers of Al-Shabaab's social media warfare machine. Ops Update 4 here. It's important to note that contrary to information being peddled by the terrorists, our camp has not been overrun. Minutes later, the KDF again emphasised to its followers the need to be aware of the enemy's methods in cyberspace, as stated in one of the opening statements of the MOD's first press release. It's important to note that the information being peddled by terrorists on social media is false and part of their propaganda. The updates on social media were met with familiar claims from Kenyans and others on Twitter about the accuracy and depth of KDF's information, as well as some comments about trust and accountability. The most striking difference between the KDF's communications response to El Ade and Kolbeo, however, is that with this latest attack, the KDF supplied their version of events before a swell of complaints about silence or any accusations of cover-up could gain traction. Alongside their ops updates, the KDF also issued a series of official press releases from the MOD, still in letter form as protocol requires, but this time posted directly to their own @KDFinfo feed. The releases offered more information on the timeline of events and some detail on casualties. What follows are three plausible explanations as to why the KDF did not offer real-time updates about the El Ade attack, but did provide information from Kolbeo 1 year later. The first explanation concerns KDF's experience in disseminating real-time information. By the time of KDF's entry into Somalia, its personnel had served on and in some cases provided top leadership for close to 50 peace support operations around the world. Despite this experience, however, at the time of the Al-Adi attack, the KDF had never really been tested in an environment where it was operational lead and the enemy was giving real-time updates. This was evident in the official communication response to Al-Adi, which came after other sources broke the news on social media, and only then in hard copy release that was photographed and shared. The task of creating and pushing the message has long been the job of official press officers, but as the Al-Adi case shows, it's especially difficult to counter when the message is supplied by terrorist groups such as Al-Shabaab that often operate in smaller, more nimble networks with flatter command and control structures. As Neville Bolt describes the situation, state bureaucracies with their junctions of decision-making face the fog of incoming information while trying to dominate the story agenda. Whatever form the official communication on social media takes, a photograph letter or a more direct tweet, the reality for a conventional military force is that response is still subject to institutional processes and protocols that govern how incoming information is analysed and responded to before the message is disseminated to the public. As the KDF itself acknowledges in relation to social media, the inherent slow pace of the bureaucratic system means that more often than not, hostile or extremist elements are better positioned to take advantage of the opportunities offered. It's important to reckon here that Al-Shabaab is very good at making such capital. Secondly, Al-Shabaab dissemination of real-time information provides this second explanation that Al-Adi seemed to teach the KDF that in order not to lose the all-important public opinion, it has to follow suit with the enemy and also disseminate credible information to the public. Granted, the limited official response to demands on social media for information relating to Al-Adi helped the KDF avoid mistakes similar to those levelled at a plethora of emergency and security organisations for their use of Twitter during Al-Shabaab's assault of Westgate. During the mall attack, the abundance of Twitter accounts providing official updates made it difficult to synchronise and follow the flow of information. But limited official information created a new problem since the substitution of multiple messages at Westgate with a communication vacuum at Al-Adi generated suspicion of silence in a social media environment where rumours rapidly spread. With no official counter-narrative, the Kenyan public were in the somewhat absurd position of perhaps trusting the adversary's account more than that of their own military. That was something suggested to me by an anonymous security source. Also within the focus groups, people were saying we weren't getting anything from at Al-Adi, we weren't getting anything from the KDF. We're getting it from Al-Shabaab, so this is true. Aided by a history of relaying information in what Al-Shabaab likes to call media warfare, the enemy was able to drive the narrative. The situation suited Al-Shabaab for more than the short-term gain of its Al-Adi reports being believed. As reflected in their online content, the organisation clearly places much value on information about victories over their enemies. Yet if victory was the most important aspect of Al-Shabaab's media warfare, then the terrorist group would be tempted to claim successes even in non-existent battles. Al-Shabaab makes no such claims because they realise the importance for them to be perceived as the trustworthy source about all activities. Propaganda may serve recruitment, but not influence warfare where credibility is crucial. You have to be credible. A Nairobi resident likened the government not telling the Kenyan public about the Al-Adi deaths to an abusive partner who's having an affair. It's like we're in a relationship where the person is cheating on you. You actually see them cheating and they tell you that they are hiding the affair to protect you because they love you. In the same vein, another focus group participant was suspicious of the lack of an official response on social media. I'm always wary of silence, especially when it comes to death. It removes the humanity of it. It makes it as if they are disposable. To me, this whole issue of so little official communication about Al-Adi has really affected my trust in the government. And this case shows that when an inquisitive public is not supplied with information from official sources it can believe, the response is to believe what is available, even if it's from the enemy. A Mombasa resident expressed as much with specific reference to the Al-Adi attack. We didn't get the truth about the fact that so many soldiers died. The government lied to us. Social media helps us find the truth. The implication there is the government's not telling us anything. We find on social media actually what it was, and that's that X amount of people died. Okay, it's coming from Al-Shabaab, but we're not hearing anything other than that. Al-Shabaab's dissemination of real-time information has fundamentally changed what need to know means in the eyes of the KDF. Since public opinion is essential, the public do need to know. Thirdly, the strengthening voice of Kenyan citizens, amplified by social media, and the potential for further reputational damage could have pushed the KDF from a need-to-know frame of mind in terms of its sharing of information to more of a right-to-know mentality. While Martha Karua's insistence on citizens' right to know about Al-Ade as it unfolded may well have had an element of political motivation, it did seem to reflect the opinion held among a significant number of focus group participants after the attack. Echoing the KDF's initial emphasis on taxation conferring the rights to know, Nairobi-based youth in particular commonly express their right to know about the military's activities in Somalia in terms of their personal contribution to public expenditure. These opinions were rarely expressed online by the university students and non-students. Reasons that social media users may decide not to engage on some open platforms include fear of victimization or condemnation, and suspicion and distrust of security and intelligence services. This despite the assertion that there's usually less fear of possible intimidation or even prosecution by those who participate in online as opposed to offline discussions in Kenya. Views expressed in person came with varying degrees of sympathy for the KDF, from "this is what we are paying them to do, they should do their job," to "I am a citizen, I pay my taxes, I should be able to know." A prominent Kenyan blogger with close to 1 million followers on Twitter was of a similar opinion when commenting on information relating to the Al-Ade attack, remarking that troops are in Somalia through taxpayer money, we have a right to know. To be sure, the majority of focus group participants recognised that the KDF's muted social media response to the Al-Ade attack was cognizant of the need to avoid sharing any information that may have handed further advantage to the perpetrators. Focus groups' participations acknowledged they did not really expect government agencies to offer sensitive security-related information, but they wanted something. Yeah. Right, the official line. Objectivity, neutrality, almost done. Objectivity, neutrality and reliability aside, the official account of Operation Linda Inchi makes frequent reference to the KDF's need to engage with the public for success in the campaign and recognises the important role of social media as a tool for the military to connect with the citizens of the Republic of Kenya as taxpayers. In demonstrating its awareness of the need to be accountable to the taxpayer, the KDF explains that the campaign against Al-Shabaab took place at a time when the country enjoyed increased democratic space due to the promulgation of a new constitution, advocating increased public voice of government policies. Also happened in an era which witnessed unparalleled access to information. In other words, the KDF acknowledges the growing significance of civil society in calling to account government institutions such as the military. The KDF also recognises that public opinion towards it has not always been favourable. Prior to the incursion into Somalia, the military's image has been falsified, reads one official account of Operation Linda Inchi, which cites claims dating from 2008 of military involvement in human rights violations, including rape, torture and the killing of innocent civilians during counterinsurgency operations in the Mount Elgon area, and persistent allegations concerning corruption in recruitment exercises and procurement processes. It was for these reasons acknowledges the military, along with the perception that they were untested, ceremonial army, and that public lacked trust in the KDF. This candid reflection suggests that the KDF is also well aware of the potential damage of more recent revelations that have come to light since Operation Linda Inchi. At Westgate, where this is taken from, for example, the Kenyan public witnessed the seeming incompetence of their security forces and later watched video footage of soldiers looting from the mall during the terrorist attack. Has anyone seen that or heard of that? No? Okay. Channel 4 News, I know, did an expose on this. It was from CCTV from inside. This is Nakumatt supermarket in Westgate, apparently showing soldiers looting. The recordings of soldiers helping themselves to expensive phones and allegedly helping themselves to is being recorded. The Recordings of soldiers allegedly helping themselves to expensive phones and other items after they had shelled the terrorist hideout led the Guardian in London's newspaper to conclude that the nation's most trusted institution now has a serious credibility problem. The KDF also faces strong allegations of being implicated in the illicit export of charcoal from Kismayo port in southern Somalia and in the trade in contraband sugar from Somalia into Kenya. In direct contravention of UN sanctions against terrorist financing, the KDF is reportedly involved in the racket with none other than Al-Shabaab, with the battlefield adversaries together running an economy that thrives on insecurity, a textbook definition of a conflict economy in that war is more profitable for a select and powerful few than peace. A recent report by the UN monitoring group in Somalia accuses AMISOM's KDF contingent of being particularly poor in the implementation of an agreement to stop the illegal trade, and concludes that the conspicuously deliberate failure to comply with the charcoal ban enables Al-Shabaab financing and undermines counter-terrorism and counter-insurgency efforts in Somalia. Acutely aware of the potential for public opinion to buckle under the accumulative weight of this bad press, the KDF... Has anyone heard of Kenyans on Twitter, or KOT? Nobody? Okay. The KDF now appears to engage with the right-to-know mentality that provides real-time information to Kenyans on social media. More precisely, the KDF are aware of the influence of Kenyans on Twitter. Anyone heard of someone tell CNN? No. Kenyans on Twitter are a formidable yet amorphous collection of generally young urban Kenyans who engage in activist-like behaviour online. KOT, as they're commonly referred to, are powerful inhabitants of Kenya's social media landscape, live-in landlords for what George Agola and Michael Ward term the country's third space. Space neither owned by the state nor mainstream media, potentially powerful enough to be contested. KOT participation is open to all and non-hierarchical in principle, notes Ogola, but its conversations are generally being initiated or popularized by a few well-known bloggers and activists who have become the community's primary definers, or as Nendo terms them, KOT's bigwigs. There's a few of them here, I won't go through their names then. Where political, the alternative narrative is often anti-government and guided by key influencers with a near celebrity status, some of whom are considered to be broadly sympathetic to the National Super Alliance coalition in opposition in Kenya, the main opposition to President Uhuru Kenyatta's ruling Jubilee Party. At best describes one informant, KOT's key influencers are representative of a doctrinaire liberal ideal that seeks transparency in any circumstances involving the state and its organs. At worst, concludes the same informant, KOT's key influencers have a pro-NASA, i.e. opposition, agenda, constantly seek to lambast what they regard as monolithic institutions. They're clear proponents of the right to know about security-related information. In the security context, KOT are very influential as a mid-term police officer, a mid-range, mid-grade police officer put it to us, such that they can force government to do things by keeping issues trending. Nobody wants to be a negative side of the KOT, explains someone from Duncan Ondimu, Special Prosecutor at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. The easiest way to lose your job is through being called out on social media for violations or corruption. KOT are really powerful, I can say really powerful, emphasises a very senior police officer who we spoke to, and they're known to have influenced the NPS, the National Police Service, to a great extent in investigations into alleged extrajudicial killings and police abuses. Many of these have been exposed through social media, often with videos. It's brought a sense of fear to us. Kenyans on Twitter create an uproar and something becomes of it. Maggie Dwyer's study of the NPS's digital strategy shows how the organisation is now attempting to use social media to enhance accountability and trust in the police, who have long experienced strained relations with the civilian population and media. That's consistently accused them of abusing their power. When compared with the NPS, many Kenyan citizens have traditionally had a less hostile attitude towards the KDF, in part because much of the country there's less frequent interaction between military and civilians. This patriotism towards the nation's defenders was also reflected by KOT's complaints on social media that they're being denied information about casualties in El Ade. Nevertheless, there is now a sense that the KDF is not exempt from the criticism that traditionally been levelled at the NPS. This is from an anonymous, quite senior security source. It won't be long before KOT have the KDF in their sights, just a matter of time. Nobody will tell you a police officer is corrupt and making deals, and the KDF are not. When KOT finds this out, they'll start a war online, and with KDF, all hell will break loose. All it will take is one more furore, like when the KDF didn't tell about the casualties from Al-Shabaab at Al-Adi. The KOT will do their thing, kick up a huge fuss on Twitter. The KDF also feels the pressure for social media. Nobody's safe nowadays. One response to criticism of security agencies has been alleged attempts by the Presidential Strategic Communications Unit, the PCSU, to set the agenda on social media through what Ogola and Awar describe as covert operations on social media. They give the example of a debate on the popular Press Pass television show in 2014 when mention was made of the opposition position, which still holds that KDF troops should be withdrawn from Somalia. In the ensuing battle for control of the narrative on how best to respond to Al-Shabaab, Ogola and Awar reveal the posting of numerous tweets in support for the government's argument, sent from multiple accounts at exactly the same time with identical wording, including in one case the same misspelling of the terrorist group of Al-Shabaab. It's unacceptable that the opposition has the same stand as Al-Shabaab. Such examples, the author suggests, point to the possible use of bots or fake accounts to counter oppositional narratives in concert with bloggers paid to tweet, comment on and retweet messages in support of government positions. It's also indicative of the politicisation of the war and the discussion around it. There's no suggestion that the KDF is involved in the use of bots or fake accounts, but there is a chance that the KDF's narratives of Al-Shabaab's attacks will be undermined by independent research by those who take neither a pro-government nor a pro-Al-Shabaab or pro-Shabaab stance in their investigations. For example, analysis conducted by the Johannesburg-based African Defence Review, an independent media company, into competing claims about the Kolbio attack, seems to indicate aspects of Al-Shabaab's claims, reported by some local media and supposedly corroborated by witnesses. The base was overrun, the KDF suffered heavy casualties, and vehicles were destroyed and equipment looted. Such investigations take weeks, if not months, to materialise, and so do not directly influence the real-time narrative. But by providing detailed evidence-based arguments that clearly question the veracity of the KDF's blanket denials, the investigations do contribute to the accumulative weight of bad press about the Kenyan military, and which the citizens they are mandated to protect and serve may encounter on social media. This only provides the enemy with yet further propaganda, as Jacob Bieders put it at the end of his analysis into the KDF's response to Kolbio. Continued obfuscation on details regarding Major Al-Shabaab's attack by the Kenyan government shows Al-Shabaab to seize the narrative of events. Additionally, it stifles attempts at accountability that could potentially mitigate further risks to Kenyan soldiers. The Kenyan government's refusal to acknowledge publicly the large numbers of soldiers killed or tactical shortfalls in major battles proves their willingness for investigations and accountability. Okay, some brief conclusions. Al-Adi was a significant flashpoint at which citizens clashed with the state over what information could be shared and with whom. The case of Al-Adi shows that while social media give publics a sense of power, there are situations in which this has its limits. Institutions such as the KDF can simply refuse to give information to those they deem to have no need to it. But when Al-Shabaab struck at Kolbio, the KDF quickly supplied Kenyan citizens with a measure of what they had asked for from Al-Adi: reportage on events and some information on casualties. In the age of social media warfare, the dissemination of such information is now essential in seeking to influence a growing, demanding and frequently vociferous audience that claims its right to know the official accounts of battles being fought using taxpayers' money. This desire for information also reflects the relationship that publics now expect to have with public institutions. It would be incorrect to conclude that, whether intentional or not, KOT alone, Kenyans on Twitter alone, has managed to push the KDF from a need-to-know policy to a right-to-know policy. The KDF has kept to its stated core values of remaining apolitical and in subordinating itself to democratic civil authority operating under a strict chain of command from the Chief of Defence Forces, who is the principal military advisor to President Kenyatta, who is the Commander-in-Chief. Given the structure, it would be fanciful to believe that the KDF then privileges a loosely knit and largely invisible collection of online activists who frequently point out the failings of the state. This is not to suggest that KDF ignores public opinion. Far from it. As well as following the views of online commentary, the KDF and other arms of the state security apparatus also have an ear for public opinion as expressed in person. This paper has taken a similar approach, applying more traditional offline methods of qualitative data collection to understand Kenyan's online voice with respect to the actions of its military. I've tried to offer a deeper insight into and the necessary context of views expressed and not expressed on social media. The focus groups with university students and non-students, for example, reveal that many Nairobi-based youth did have a keen interest in the KDF's progress at Al-Ade. Part of their motivation to follow reports on the attack on social media was because as taxpayers, they had concerns over the fiscal accountability of the military, and they used a rhetorical technique that equated their payment of taxes with their right to know. Yet this was rarely expressed online. A conclusion to be drawn here is that for all the advantages that platforms such as Twitter hold as a lens to view connected Kenyans as a whole, the opinions of a loud and sometimes boisterous KOT are not necessarily representative of Kenyans on social media or the full spectrum of their opinions. Some prefer to post their thoughts in private private groups on WhatsApp, Kenya's most active social media platform, or to remain completely silent online. Methodologically, this paper points to the importance for research on social media content to also consider the gains to be made by data that's collected offline. The analysis of the incidents covered here show that social media and the debate that continues offline helps to forge a new language of citizenship and entitlement that extends beyond this Kenyan example. Inspired by the idea of Ethiopia's quiet technopolitics, this paper has shown that social media platforms such as Twitter can be seen as sites of noisy contestation where security-related matters affecting Kenyans are played out in the open, often with a strong political undercurrent, by ordinary citizens and powerful key influencers. As much as radio is an unlikely medium of comparison in the unregulated social media world of influencers, fake accounts and bots, parallels can also be drawn with Nicole Stremlau's work on Somali call-in programs where citizens discuss accountability and democratic participation. In the same way as the spontaneity and authenticity of the Somali call-in shows is constructed by clientelistic forces, the third space that is Kenya's social media, initially free of government control in the mainstream media, is also finding that its narrative is increasingly influenced by invisible hired hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and please join me in giving a round of applause for Tom.